Over the next couple of videos, we'll be using Premiere as a workflow booster for a motion design project. One of the best opportunities to save time and frustration is when you're working with audio. Audio can be a hugely important part of motion projects, and working with it in After Effects is pretty rough. Adobe does make a dedicated audio app called Audition, but we're going to be editing and adjusting audio, then adding visuals and adjusting them to go along with that audio, and then probably adjusting and readjusting everything again until we get it all perfect. Premiere is the app that does all of these things well. We're going to be putting together what's called an animatic. This is an essential pre-visualization tool for shoots and bigger projects, but the nature of motion design can sometimes make it easy to blow right past the beginning steps. Previs obviously becomes more important when you're working with a team or when you need to get sign-off from your client. But once you start doing this, even on solo projects, you'll see how much easier it is to catch things before they become problems. And you'll see that Premiere is also a great place to do this work. We'll be working on the new version of Be the Ice Sculptor, the final project from Animation Bootcamp, and we'll be working with sketches and storyboards by an awesome studio called Ordinary Folk. Right now, all we've got is the script and some initial sketches, but we need to help move things along by putting together this animatic. We use this to start establishing the overall pacing and vibe of the piece. We can start selecting music tracks and hear them in context, and once we rough edit the visuals along with the voiceover, it will help us find any spots that we might have gaps in the visuals, or where we might already have too much and need to trim something. Doing this work in Premiere lets you focus on the timing, gives you a lot of precision and flexibility to experiment, and when this is ready for animation, you'll be able to easily push all of your work directly into After Effects. While it can be satisfying to start seeing the visuals laid out on a timeline, it's really hard to get a feel for the timing without having any audio, so we're going to start there. Music is hugely important here too, and we'll get to that very soon, but the voiceover is what really creates the backbone of the piece. We'll of course be having a professional voiceover artist record the script eventually, but for now, it's on us to create a temporary version called a scratch track. And yes, I know some of us can get self-conscious recording ourselves, me too, but this can be useful even if no one but you ever hears this. It's a really great way to start sculpting the piece, because when you say the script out loud, not just read it, but feel it, you'll naturally start finding the emotion in the script and how fast or slow it wants to be read. From a technical perspective, you can really use any audio recording device. Your phone is fine. But if you have any microphone attached to your computer, you can record directly to a Premiere timeline. I'll start out by creating a new project and name this Be the Ice Sculptor. Make sure it's going the right place. And I'll import the storyboard frames later, so I'm not going to worry about finding them here. We could automatically create a sequence when we create this project, but we'll do that inside the project. So I'll choose Create. Now we have an empty project. First thing we need to create is a sequence. So I'll come over here to my project panel and either click on this New Item button, Sequence is the first thing, or you can right-click in the empty area here, New Item, Sequence, or you can come up to File, New, Sequence, or hit Control or Command N. There are a ton of presets in here, and if you're working with a specific format, you will want to make sure that you choose the right thing, and there's some easier ways to do that we'll get to later when we're dealing with footage. For this, I'm going to choose ARRI 1080p and the 23.976 preset. I'll go ahead and name my sequence, Be the Ice Sculptor Scratch VO. Now, if you look down in your timeline, you'll see that there are these little microphones, and that's what we're going to use to record directly to one of these audio tracks. I'll go ahead and scroll this open with Alt or Option and my scroll wheel. And before I click record, I'm going to right click here and choose VoiceOver Record Settings. In this little pop-up, you can set your audio source if you need to, and you can see there's a volume meter to make sure that you are getting a signal and that it's loud enough. You can name these recordings right here. You'll see by default, it just takes the name of the track, but we could give it a better name so we could find this file later if we need to, like BTIS Scratch. And now we're ready to record, so I'll hit close. And let's do this. You're about to watch me record this scratch track, but here are a few pieces of advice when you're doing one yourself. Read through the script out loud at least a couple times before you record. This will prepare you for any tricky parts, but more importantly, it helps you get comfortable with the words. Being comfortable makes it much easier to relax and essentially act the script instead of just reading the words. While this recording is being replaced, your scratch track very well may establish the tone of the real read. especially if clients or collaborators will be hearing your voiceover for the first couple rounds of reviews. If the script is short, it's easy to record a couple read-throughs. So try a different pace, different energy levels, maybe do a few variations on the really important lines. You're going to edit this, remember, so give yourself some options to work with. And remember to give yourself a few seconds of silence at the beginning and the end of recording so you don't get cut off. Unless you need the recording to fit to a very specific length, don't rush. A normal, comfortable pace is always a good place to start. Unless this is something very serious, smile when you talk. It sounds silly, but you can hear the difference. Same thing with your hands. Gesturing with your hands while you record may feel ridiculous, but for me at least, it really helps me be more energetic and more engaged with the script. All right, let's record this thing. Consider the master ice sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No, her concerns are of a higher order, to craft. No, her concerns are of a higher order, to craft. The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels, and sizzles away to reveal a majestic robot, the golden bobsled, or a tiny T-Rex from a simple block of ice. The tool is but the gateway to imagination, an instrument for an icy symphony. An instrument for an icy symphony. Without the craft, the tool is nothing. Without the craft, the tool is nothing. It looks like our recording turned out pretty good. If we finished up and realized that our clip was a little too quiet, like this one, we can totally still work with that by right-clicking and choosing Audio Gain. You can manually boost it by a few decibels, or you can let Premiere do that work by choosing Normalize. I'm going to choose Max Peaks and set that to -6 dB. Let's try that. Better. Wait, gain? How's that different from volume? I showed you a control for track volume earlier, and you can also adjust or keyframe volume on every clip, but volume is what comes at the end. Gain and volume are similar, but essentially gain is the input, volume is the output. In practical terms, if you record something a little too low, you could probably turn up the volume enough to compensate, but there's a limit to how much you can boost it. See, 15 decibels is the ceiling here. But if I adjust the gain, you can actually see that change in the waveform. And now that this clip is at a good level, adjustments to the volume will be a lot more meaningful. We'll talk more about this later, but for a baseline voiceover read like this, you want to see your waveform filling up the vertical space in the timeline, but not quite touching the top. Over in the audio meter, you want your peaks to be hitting comfortably in the yellow. -6 is the ideal for voiceover, but not turning red. Red is bad. Of course, if your original recording is way too low or way too high, there's only so much either of these will be able to fix. All right, time to start cutting these things up. The most basic function of editing is simply removing the unwanted stuff. In this case, that means gaps, any lines I messed up, alternate takes we don't like, and maybe any big audible breaths. To give us more to work with, I made another longer VO recording with a few read-throughs and alternate takes that we need to cut down, and we've given you this file in case you want to practice along with me. But first, we need to learn how to use the tools. You can see I have my audio track opened up nice and tall so we can see the waveform well. Using your basic selection tool, which you can get by clicking here or pressing V, you can drag clips around and use this to select things, and you can grab the ends of clips and manipulate them. But that's not super helpful when we have one long clip like this. What we need to do is make some cuts. So we're going to use this razor tool right here, which you can also get by pressing C, and you can start just tapping wherever you like and make cuts. I'm going to undo those because those were just in random places. You can also make cuts by hitting Control or Command K. So you could totally preview a little section, stop, make a cut. Preview the next section, stop, make a cut. But we're learning this program to save time, right? The cool thing is that you can actually make these cuts with either tool while your preview is rolling. A lot of editing time is spent just reviewing the material. So if you're able to multitask, you can use your ears and your eyes to help you find the spots where you'll want to make these cuts as you're reviewing the clip. When you run across anything that's obviously not needed, like a messed up line, a big gap, anything like that, you can go ahead and just delete that while you're rolling too. start off with a little cut to get rid of that silence right there. Go ahead and hit delete to just get rid of it. And let's give this a shot. Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No, her concerns are of a higher order, to craft. The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels and sizzles away to reveal a majestic robot, the golden bobsled, or a tiny T-Rex from a simple block of ice. The tool is but the gateway to imagination, an instrument for an icy symphony. Without the craft, the tool is nothing. Without the craft, the tool is nothing. So there's a good example of where I did more than one read of the line. I like the second one better, so I'll just go ahead and throw out that first one. Let's make a cut here and check out the next section. This is just more of the same, so I'm going to speed this up. It does take some practice to be able to fluidly review and make cuts at the same time, so it's totally okay to pause and replay the VO as often as you like. So I have a handful of these gaps that I want to get rid of, and I'm going through right now and holding Shift to select multiples at once because I actually want to go ahead and just get rid of those. And while I could hit delete, that would leave a bunch of gaps, and maybe that's fine, but I'd actually like to condense these as well. So let's select these. Within this take, I'm going to go ahead and leave that gap there. If I actually select these and hit Shift Delete, it's going to not only delete those, but get rid of those gaps, which in this case is pretty handy. I'll go ahead and delete this big gap, kind of leave a space because this is a whole new take here. You'll probably want to review again. Editing is largely a process of review and refine, review and refine. I found that I mostly liked the third read through, but had a couple spots I wanted to replace to make them a little stronger. As I'm listening, I'm going to use Shift Select to grab anything that I think I might want to replace. Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No, her concerns are of a higher order, to craft. The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels and sizzles away to reveal a majestic robot, the golden bobsled, or a tiny T-Rex from a simple block of ice. The tool is but the gateway to imagination, an instrument for an icy symphony. Without the craft, the tool is nothing. I feel like these two sections could be a little better, so I'm going to right-click and label them red. And yes, clips in the timeline can be labeled totally differently from that original file in the project panel. And now I'm just going to find other versions of those to swap in. I believe this one was good. Without the craft, the tool is nothing. Without the craft, the tool is nothing. Those are pretty close. Without the craft, the tool is nothing. Without the craft, the tool is nothing. I actually like the first half of this one and the second half of this one. So let's get out that razor, click, click, get rid of this stuff, and then we can just drag this over here. Let's see how that feels. Without the craft, the tool is nothing. I think that's a good ending. Let's grab these, zoom out, and just drag these over to the end. Can delete that red one and tack this right on here. Icy Symphony. Without the craft, the tool is nothing. I'm happy with that. Let's see. I felt like this cuts was just a little weak. Cuts. Ironic. To craft. Where is that? Cuts. Notice how I'm using visuals to mostly find these little spots. Once you start doing this, you kind of get a feel for the way waveforms work, and you can start finding those similar shapes within the same words. In this case, I'm actually going to grab this, I'm going to copy it, and come over here, and now I'm going to use a new tool because I want to make some space here. I'm going to grab the Track Select Forward tool, which you can also get by pressing A, and you'll see how you get this little double arrow cursor. This actually lets me select everything to the right of my cursor, and then I can just drag those over to make some space. So now I can make myself a little space, paste in that alternate take of this, get rid of that one, see how this feels.
Excalibur shapes, cuts.
Then I can press A to grab that track select tool again, grab all of this, and just pop that right back here.
Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels and sizzles away to reveal.
I'm pretty happy with what we have here, so I'll go ahead and commit to this edit. I'm going to zoom out a bit, and then just use my cursor to drag around all of this earlier stuff. I'm just going to take that and shove it way later in the timeline. And then I'll right-click in the empty area up here and choose Ripple Delete to get rid of that gap. Now we have our good edit that we will work with in a minute. And in case we want any of this stuff, it's still there waiting for us. Using just a couple tools and a lot of listening, we've made our initial cut down. But that's just the first step. We're going to keep using those same tools, and learn some more, of course, as we refine the timing and start creating a flow. Editing has aspects that are very technical and some that are squishy. Unless you have a very specific length that the final piece needs to be, welcome to one of the squishy parts. We're going to refine this cut and make everything feel right. We'll honestly be doing this a couple times. I'll do a quick pass now just to make it feel natural. I think that a couple spots could probably use a little more room to breathe, and maybe a few spots could be just a little tighter. This is also a good excuse to show you a few more valuable editing techniques, including what's known as ripple editing, which condenses or moves the timeline as you go instead of leaving gaps. You already saw a little bit of this. We can make a cut, select that piece, delete it, right-click in that gap, and choose Ripple Delete. But that's a lot of clicks. And I already showed you that you can save one step by selecting a piece and hitting Shift Delete. But you actually have a Ripple Delete tool over here. It's the top one in this group, where you can get it by hitting B. And that gives you a slightly different cursor. Notice our normal cursor is red, and that's going to drag the ends and leave a gap. But if you use your Ripple Delete tool, you can drag, and it will condense everything. Or I can actually drag that back out and it will move everything to accommodate. If you're working with your normal selection tool, you can also hold Control or Command to get that Ripple Edit tool without even hitting B. Or some of my favorite keyboard shortcuts in the whole program, if you hit W, it will Ripple Edit from the current position of your CTI to the next edit. Bam. If you hit Q, it will Ripple Edit from your current CTI position to the previous edit. Bam. I love those two, and I use them all the time because doing that stuff with only the mouse can be kind of a drag. If you do have a sequence with a lot of gaps and you want to close them all up, you don't have to go and individually right-click each one. You can actually select all of these and go up to Sequence, Close Gap, and that will close one gap or 1,000. Once you have your gaps closed up, you'll probably still want to do a little fine-tuning. And again, we could do this by dragging, but that can get a little tedious and a little inexact. If you need to be very precise, you can select a clip or clips and press Alt or Command on Mac and the left and right arrow keys. If you want that to be a bigger move, you can hold Alt or Command plus Shift and the arrow keys to jump 5 frames at a time. Nudging will always be destructive to the clips you're overlapping, and unfortunately there's no ripple nudge without selecting the rest of the timeline. But if you hold Alt or Option along with the greater than and less than keys, which are also comma and period, it will nudge the clip around and extend the surrounding clips to fill those gaps as it makes them. Those should help save you some clicks. Now, I'm going to use all these techniques to make some small adjustments to the edit. Again, I'm just trying to make the timing feel more or less natural before adding the music. We won't necessarily always need to chop your voiceover up this much, but doing it like this gives you a lot of control for later. And for now, for you, it's good practice, right? So for this part, we will be starting and stopping a lot because we're just going to kind of listen to these spaces between gaps and make sure that everything feels like it's spaced out appropriately. Zoom in a little bit because we really want to be able to see the waveforms. And let's just start working.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor is the newness.
I'm going to give that just a little bit of space. I grab the Track Select Forward tool, which is A, and I could push everything a little bit with my mouse, or I could, of course, nudge. Let's give it just a little bit of a gap and see how that feels.
The Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles.
Right. Give that just a tiny bit of a nudge here.
Her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No, her concern.
And while it's not huge here, I'm going to go ahead and just condense this so that we get rid of that little bit of a breath that was on the end of there. And let's see how this gap feels.
The crowd? No. Her concern.
I would tighten this up a little bit.
Crowd? No. Her concerns are of a higher order. To craft.
I like a little bit of that kind of dramatic pause here, maybe just a touch less.
Of a higher order. To craft.
There we go. Because we need a little bit of gravitas as we come into that, right? We're kind of getting the important line.
Higher order. To craft. The ice.
Way too much gap there. So this is a good opportunity to hit Q and just ripple edit to that previous edit there. See how this bit feels.
Higher order. To craft. The icy Excalibur.
Just a hair less. So I'll hit W here to trim that. Works in the gaps too.
Higher order. To craft. The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels, and sizzles away to reveal.
I think I like this having a little bit of a faster cadence in here. Let's try just spacing all of this out and see how it feels. Instead of dragging and instead of nudging, you can also type in values. I'm going to hit +5 and notice up here in our little timecode box, it adds that. It's going to move all the selected clips 5 frames to the right once I hit enter. I'll do that same trick again here and let's just see how this feels.
The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels, and sizzles away to reveal.
Honestly, not bad. I like a little bit of gap there. We might see what the music feels like.
To reveal a majestic robot. The Golden Bobs.
That's all just a little close here. Let's space that out. Space this out just a bit.
To reveal a majestic robot.
A little bit of a breath on the end of there too.
To reveal a majestic robot.
I'll live with it. It's Scratch VO.
To reveal a majestic robot. The Golden Bobsled.
We're probably going to need more time here. I think this feels natural, but once we see the animation, we kind of know that we're going to need more space. So I'll go ahead and leave a bigger gap here.
Away to reveal a majestic.
Well, not that one.
To reveal a majestic robot. The Golden Bobsled, or a tiny.
Which means we probably then need some space here.
A majestic robot. The Golden Bobsled, or a tiny T-Rex from a simple block of ice.
We'll definitely have to rework that spot once we get the visuals in here.
The tool is but the block of ice. The tool is but the gateway to imagination, an instrument for an icy symphony.
I might insert just a little bit of space here, just a couple frames.
The gateway to imagination, an instrument for an icy symphony. Without the craft,
we definitely need a little bit of a pause before the very end here.
For an icy symphony. Without the craft, the tool is nothing.
Just a little gap there. Let's listen to this whole thing, see how it feels.
Consider the master ice sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No, her concerns are of a higher order. To craft. The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels, and sizzles away to reveal a majestic robot. The Golden Bobsled, or a tiny T-Rex from a simple block of ice. The tool is but the gateway to imagination, an instrument for an icy symphony. Without the craft, the tool is nothing.
That probably won't be perfect once we add music and visuals, but it feels like a good starting point. And while having this many cuts means you do have to put a little more effort into moving things around, it also gives you very precise control, so you can sculpt this audio to have exactly the flow you want. All right, let's add some music. Unless you're able to have music composed for your project, I highly recommend using a dedicated stock music site where you can search by genre, feel, tempo, even certain instruments. I'm using Soundstripe here, but I'm also personally a big fan of Premium Beat. Choosing music is a bit of an art form in itself, and it ultimately just requires a fair amount of listening to different tracks to see what fits for this project. I probably end up listening to portions of 50 to 75 tracks to make a list of 10 to 15 maybes, which I'll then end up narrowing down to 3 or 4 that I'll actually make as samples for myself or the client. Most stock sites allow you to create playlists or collections, so I like to create a new one of those for each project and add in every track I hear that might work. You can always trim your list down later, but it'll be almost impossible to come back and find that one specific song that you wished you'd saved, right? Sometimes you'll end up with a song that isn't quite right for this project, but might be good for a future one. So again, you'll be really happy that you saved it somewhere. For this project, I think we want a mixture of artsy pomp gravitas with a fun and quirky vibe to help make sure we're not taking things too seriously. So I started with some of those search terms, quirky, epic, and just started listening to the tracks. I personally like to preview somewhere in the middle of each song because that usually gives you a better feel of what the track is really like. Sometimes I'll find a track I like and click on it to see a list of similar tracks or more tracks from that same creator, because those are usually going to be exactly what I'm looking for to build out that list of maybes. Once that branch runs out, I'll often start over and try some other search terms or some variations on my initial search. Personally, I'm a big fan of searching for certain moods or feels of music, and I really like when I end up finding something from an unexpected genre. A lot of these sites will also have their own curated playlists for certain moods or project types. There's really no shortcut here. You kind of just have to plow through, listen to a lot of stuff, and see what feels right. When you've built up enough tracks, you can download preview versions to bring into Premiere. You know I'm all about saving you time, so here's another option you should know about. In Premiere, if you go up to the Essential Sound panel and then click on Browse, there's a whole stock music library as part of Adobe Stock. You have the same kinds of search filters right here, so let's choose Epic and Quirky and see what we get. And the cool thing about this is when you preview these tracks, it actually previews it along with whatever's already on your timeline. Check this out.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles.
I don't know that that's the right track necessarily, but it's nice being able to just preview all of this right here.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her?
I don't think this is our track, but just to show you, I'm going to go ahead and grab this, and you can actually pull it right down to your timeline. If you do decide to buy this, you'll be able to purchase it from Adobe Stock, and it will swap it out with the full licensed version. I don't really want that track. Let's go ahead and undo. Just to show you one other tip, when you do use some of these stock sites like Soundstripe, a lot of them have free extensions that you can install and open right here in Premiere, so you'll be able to browse Soundstripe's library without leaving Premiere. Unfortunately, these don't preview with your timeline just by themselves, but it still saves you some steps. That said, we already did choose some music. I downloaded preview versions of those tracks and put them into a folder on my hard drive named Music Selects. I'll just drag in that whole folder so we can work with these. Open this up, and now I'm going to give each of these another quick listen to see if I can narrow this down a bit more. Remember that description field we brought over earlier? I love using this to make notes about the tracks, and you can also take advantage of color coding to help keep things straight. One more quick note about these preview tracks. You'll hear that they all have this little voice in the background.
Soundstripe.
That's called an audio watermark, and it's just there because we haven't licensed these tracks yet. Once you pay for the license, you'll be able to download a high-quality version of the file without that watermark. Also, no matter how many times you tell your client, no, it won't be in the final, they're still going to keep asking. So you can see I'm buzzing through these and making sure I listen to the different points of the songs. A lot of these sites have versions of these cuts that are already 30 or 60 seconds, but I really like to get the full piece so you get the entire range of this track. You might find that the beginning of a piece is too slow, but the end is perfect, and we're going to be editing these tracks to be exactly what we want. So you want to make sure that you give everything a good listen and see what all you're working with so you don't accidentally leave something behind that turns out to be really valuable. Now that I've done that initial read through, I'm going to go ahead and grab these that are all maybes or, good enough. Let's say this group here, and I'm going to set those to be, let's say, mango. And that way they'll kind of stand out from the others. I'm going to go ahead and make another bin and say no, and put all of the stuff that I don't like into that. And that way, just in case I change my mind, it's there, it's easy. We can always delete it from the project later. So now I'm going to take turns one at a time, bringing these down to my timeline. Let's make sure that's on track 2. Open this up a little bit, maybe bring this one down a bit. I'm going to grab my track mixer just so that everything I put on here can be good. You're usually going to want your music down somewhere around -16 or so. Let's just see how this feels. And then we're going to start swapping out the tracks and just give each one a good listen along with the VO.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No, her concerns are of a higher order, to craft. The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels, and sizzles away to reveal a majestic.
Notice how I'm kind of grabbing different parts of the track so I can feel it. I like some of what's going on there. Let's go ahead and grab this next one. And if I drag this down to the timeline and hold Alt or Option, it will replace the clip that I'm dragging it over.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No.
Maybe. This has a very different feel, but I like having some with very different feels so that we can kind of get some good options here.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No, her concerns are of a higher order. To craft. The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels, and sizzles.
You know, listening to that one, I don't think that's it.
To craft. The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels. Consider the Master Ice Sculptor.
I like this
Is
one.
the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No, her concerns are of a higher order. To craft. The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, sculptor. Is the newness.
Slow start. Let's see what's happening later here.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and.
This one's a little too fancy for its own good, I think.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No, her concerns are of a higher order. To craft.
Maybe. All right, well, I have what I think are 3 decent choices here. And so now I'm going to bring these down and give each of them a solid listen. But first, I'm going to make a new copy of my sequence. This way, we can move forward without having a bunch of extra clutter on the timeline, but we'll always have that previous work in case we decide we need it later. I'll come up to the project panel, right-click on my sequence, and choose Duplicate. Now I'm going to change this name, BTS2 Music Options. We'll add a 1 to that one so that they sort the correct way. And now that we're starting to get a few sequences in here, let's go ahead and make a bin. Call it Sequence. Drop those into it. Staying tidy, right? So I'll make sure that I open that new sequence so I'm not accidentally working in the other one, which we can go ahead and close. I'll zoom out. We can go ahead and delete this stuff because it's saved in that other timeline, right? And now I'm going to drag a box around all those clips, holding Alt or Option, just drag to the right, and it will make a copy. You could use copy paste too, of course. Let's make one more. You could make each of these into its own sequence if you prefer. Personally, I like doing it this way because it's a little easier to copy the storyboard images once we bring those in. Now we'll add each of the 3 music tracks under each of those VO edits to give ourselves some really solid preview edits. But wait, these tracks are all like 2 minutes long and our VO is only like 33 seconds. So that means more editing, unless we let Premiere do it for us. I'm going to start with this track right here. I'll just drag it down to the timeline. And I remember that the beginning of this one is a touch slow.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the.
Let's maybe just solo that for a second. Come up here to where the music actually starts. Yeah, I'm just going to cut that right there and then just drag this over to the beginning of the track. And now we're ready.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern?
This one's a bit loud, so I just drag down the volume directly on the clip here. But obviously this is way too long. So if we come over here to our tools, underneath your Ripple Edit tool are some other tools, one of which is the Remix tool. So if you grab that and then come to the end of your music clip, and then just drag that in until you get to the length that you want it to be. Premiere will take a second and analyze the track, and then it will automatically make cuts for you to make the track that length. Check this out.
Concern, how it sparkles and impresses the crowd.
See these little zigzag cuts? Those are Remix stitching the track together.
T-Rex from a simple block of ice. The tool is but the gateway to imagination, an instrument.
Nice. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with the other ones. I will point out that if you don't love what it did, that you can come up here to your Essential Sound panel, and there's a little twirly here called Customize. And then you can decide if you want fewer segments. This is how many edits it makes. And then you can decide how much variation there is within the song as well. Let's grab this Pizzicati track. And wow, that one's very long. And this one. You'll notice these are all just a touch longer than our VO is, but without totally destroying the feel of the music and wrecking the rhythm, it's not going to be exact, but Premiere will get as close as it can. I'm going to spend just a few minutes tweaking these settings for each of these so that I can get the sound that I'm after. So with just a few clicks, we have close enough music edits that are the length we want, and they have actual endings instead of just lame fade outs. Let's give each of these a quick review and probably make a few more adjustments as we go. So we're going to give this a listen and then adjust things as we go.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor.
Right off the bat, I think that we'll probably need to give this a little breathing room at the beginning. So let's just grab all of the VO and move it over after that first note.
Consider the Master
I think that works.
Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No, her.
So I want to call this out. This is a great little audio cue. This particular track is maybe a little aggressive with some of those, and it may not work for every project. We have a nice little gap here in the audio that kind of sets up where that huh can happen. And that's going to be perfect to do something interesting with the visuals. So that's the kind of stuff that you want to watch out for when you're building these and be thinking of what that can do and where you might need a little space.
This is the crowd? No.
Like, should we perhaps space out this no a little bit to accommodate that? Maybe. Let's try grabbing all of these, shove this over a little bit to there, and see how that feels.
And impresses the crowd? No, Perkins.
Yeah, I think that works just fine. I'm also noticing we do have this nice defined end here, and I bet if we scoot our end over to line up about here, that's probably going to work well.
Without the craft, the tool is nothing.
So we have a nice poppy little ending, and now we've kind of lined up the end, and obviously we have some room to fill here, but we've kind of done it earlier on, so we know that we just need to space everything out a bit to accommodate.
No, her concerns are of a higher order.
So let's see if we can just start nudging things over to fill up that space. Maybe about like that.
And impresses the crowd? No, her concerns are of a higher order.
Maybe just a touch less there.
No, her concerns are of a higher order. To craft. Higher order. To craft. The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels and sizzles away to reveal a majestic robot. The gold.
We got another of those great sound cues right after we've revealed the first creation. Perfect.
To reveal a majestic robot. The golden bobsled, or a.
I bet we can buy ourselves a little bit of room there because of that audio cue.
Majestic robot. The golden bobsled, or a tiny T-Rex.
So then we could probably space this out just a bit, give each of those a little bit of time for the visuals.
Robot. The golden bobsled, or a tiny T-Rex from a simple block of ice. The tool is but the gateway.
There's an opportunity for some room.
Block of ice. The tool is but.
That's maybe a bit too much though.
Simple block of ice. The tool is but the gateway to imagination. An instrument for an icy symphony. Without the craft, the tool is nothing.
Got a little too much space here. Gonna have to make this up somewhere. Perhaps we can give this just a bit more of a dramatic pause between there. Let's see how this all
Simple
feels.
Block of ice. The tool is but the gateway to imagination. An instrument for an icy symphony. Without the craft, the tool is nothing.
I think that'll probably work. Let's give this whole thing a listen and just see how it feels. And you can kind of start imagining some of the visuals as you hear this too.
Consider the Master Ice Sculptor. Is the newness of the chainsaw her greatest concern? How it sparkles and impresses the crowd? No, her concerns are of a higher order, to craft. The icy Excalibur shapes, cuts, chisels, and sizzles away to reveal a majestic robot, the Golden Bobsled, or a tiny T-Rex from a simple block of ice. The tool is but the gateway to imagination, an instrument for an icy symphony. Without the craft, the tool is nothing.
Nice. There's one or two spots that I think there's maybe a little too much room right now, but I do think once we get the visuals in here, that it'll probably fill those up just fine. Thanks for sticking with me through all of that. With audio editing, a lot of what's correct is really just based on listening several times and making adjustments until it feels right. So while talking about it helps, I thought it was important to share the process and let you see how it really works in practice. I'm going to spend a few minutes doing some of that same process with the other two tracks, and then these will be ready to share. This is helpful for me creatively. We've already started finding some interesting little moments in the music that could drive something cool in the visuals. But when I need to get sign off on the music track from my team or my client, I really like sending this instead of just the track by itself, because now they can get a good sense of what this track will be like in the context of the actual project. Sometimes Remix will be perfect and you can stop here, but I'd like to be a little more intentional about the music on this project. For now, though, I think this feels like a great point to bring in the visuals so that we can really get the full context of what we're making.